It's game week. It is game week. Football is officially back, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get it. The Swag MEAC Challenge is on Saturday, so it's only right that we kick off Monday with a MEAC conference preview. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. And I appreciate you for making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day, going on this journey with us. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S, ends with an S. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And nowadays, every potential new hire feels like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people faster and for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. Today's episode will wrap up with the 5 most pressing questions that I want to see the answer to in 2023. But we kick it off with the 3 most interesting teams in the MEAC. The MEAC SWAC Challenge is Saturday. It's Monday. We are officially in a game week. I'm ecstatic. My favorite sport is back. So we're going to kick it off with looking at the conference as a whole, not only South Carolina State, which we will get, a little bit narrow or more narrow focus as the week goes on. But these are my 3 most interesting teams in the conference. And I'll say in a soft order. This is kind of how I have them. I wake up tomorrow and, hey, who knows? I might look at this at the end of the show and say, I'm going to move 2-1. I'm going to move 3-2, 1 all the way down to 3. These 3 teams are interchangeable, but they are Morgan State, Norfolk State, North Carolina Central. Those are my 3 most interesting teams, the teams that I am the most interested in. And I'll tell you why. Morgan State a little bit softer because that's actually within our most pressing questions. But Morgan State just interests me, and I'm interested in Morgan State because they just feel like such a wild card. How's that for a tease? We'll get into more of them in segment 3. Now, Norfolk State to me is so fascinating because they completely overhauled, right? I look at them as a team that they didn't live up to expectations last year. They were a bit of a failure last year. J.J. Davis was not the guy we saw in 2021. So when you're looking at Coach Odoms, you're thinking, all right, man, you didn't change so many people. I feel like there was so many people who left Norfolk State into the transfer portal. It just felt that way. What you going to do now? You done brought in a new squad. You got to replenish some of that talent. And it's not like that talent was overly successful, but we're still not going to give you the leeway to really have a down year this year. You're going to have to be better, or people are going to have real vocal frustration likely about what's going on out there in Norfolk, Virginia. But then you look at North Carolina Central, and what's so fascinating to me about them is that everybody just kind of gives them the conference because they have so many returning pieces, because they have the best conference, the best quarterback in the conference, the best quarterback in Black college football, because they have arguably the best player in Black college football in Khalil Baker, a guy who many people feel is going to be an All-American and a potential NFL draft pick, right? You have these 2 players, maybe the 2 best players in Black college football, honestly. At least as far as the FCS goes, they might really be up there as far as in that conversation, I'll say. And everybody just kind of says, okay, that's them. They won the championship last year. But are they going to be able to replicate exactly what they were able to do? With so much rollover, are you going to be able to do exactly what you just did? I don't know. That's the most interesting thing. And it kind of leads into the first most pressing question. What is North Carolina Central's Achilles heel? They returned so many players, and that was the key. I wanted to not tease and get too much into this question. What is North Carolina Central's Achilles heel? Because they won the Celebration Bowl last year. They won the MEAC last year. They beat everybody except for South Carolina State last year, and that was a pretty close game, right? I know there's been jokes made and commentary made about their loss to South Carolina State, but everybody else who's talking about it lost to North Carolina Central, if those are coming from the MEAC, you know? So North Carolina Central seems to be primed for a repeat, but there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with every team. There's no such thing as perfection. It's about, is this hole exploitable? And I think you have to look at the pass defense, because pass offense, first in the conference. Rush offense, first in the conference. Rush defense, I think they were second in the conference. But then you look at pass defense, they're fourth. When you look at sacks, they're low. This is not something that they do exceptionally well. So when you're looking at a team that seems to have everything going for them, you have to look at things that they are middle in the pack with. They're right there in the middle of the pack when it comes to, actually slightly below, but middle of the pack when it comes to pass defense. You're not getting after the quarterback, right? So maybe you're trying to take advantage of those trenches. Is that the thing that's going to keep North Carolina Central from being able to repeat? When you look at some of the games where they gave up the most points, such as Campbell, such as New Hampshire, such as South Carolina State, such as Jackson State, when you look at those games, those teams were all able to pass on North Carolina Central. That could be the one thing that you would say, okay, if I can pass on them. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes easier said than done. Everybody knows what to do until it's time to get into the game. Then it's like, I know what to do, but I can't do it. I can't set it up. You can't get into a point where they're going to start running clock down on you. That's what you can't do. You have to make sure that when you're throwing the football and you're racking up yards, it's not yardage to catch up. Got to make sure that it's yardage to either stay on par or extend the lead or take a lead. That's what's going to be important. So the Achilles heel for North Carolina Central might be the inability to stop the pass, whether that's with sacking the quarterback or just, it all goes hand in hand. I was going to break down all through the passing, how to stop the pass and everything, whether that's rushing the passer, whether that's coverage. The marriage of the two is what's really important, but I'm breaking down the two individual things as that goes. Now, as we move forward, we're going to look at some more of the pressing questions, and we'll probably go into 4 teams specifically, but we'll just be a little bit more vague on the last 2 teams that will be remaining as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, and LinkedIn, they're honestly a necessity for any small business owner. And if you're not using them, somebody needs to find LinkedIn to get a new business owner, because you are failing your company if you're not doing that, because they can help you find the right fit faster. There's a reason that small businesses rate LinkedIn.com as the #1 place for new hires. It's extremely simple. You go through, post your job for free. That means not a dime out of your pocket. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. You'll use the purple hashtag hiring frame, and that's it. It's that simple. It's that easy, right? And it's free. Not a dime out of your pocket. Barely any time spent out of your day. Go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free and get the right fit faster, because the right fit can completely change your culture. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every day. And tomorrow, everydayers, we're going to run this whole thing back, but we're going to do it with the SWAC. So we'll have the most interesting team, and we'll have the 5 most pressing questions within the SWAC. But right now, let's continue this path that we're going down when it comes to the MEAC, because I feel like we're kind of heating up. And the next question is Howard ready to be a champion? Last season, when you look at everything that happened last season, it feels as if this is their time, supposed to be their time. I know North Carolina Central is right there. So it's kind of like you can't say it with just the most confidence, but it kind of feels like, okay, Howard is supposed to capitalize on the season they had last year. That might not mean winning a championship. It actually might mean being right where you are. The improvement for Howard, to me, is beyond just the MEAC. That improvement for Howard is having a winning record. That was something that they were really bothered by, despite being technically the co-champions in the MEAC. And I think that that's something that should be aimed for, having a winning record, because North Carolina Central is really good. And there's no reason for me to expect them to drop off. That being said, Howard was really good too, and it'll be a tough game. They're already circling that game. They're already talking about that game, already saying, hey, Central, we're not the same Howard. We're not those same guys that you whooped up on last season. We're a different team now. They're already hyping that game up, but I do think it's important that Howard makes sure to stay tight, make sure that they aren't caught sleeping, because this might be a situation where if you do lose 2 other games elsewhere, you're done. Because Howard and North Carolina Central are that good. And it could be a point where if you win, you have the tiebreaker. You have the tiebreaker. But if that team loses 2 times, the other team might not lose at all. Like, let's say Howard beats North Carolina Central, but they lose to a Delaware State and a Morgan State. Well, they might still end up losing the conference, because I do think the MEAC has a way of having stuff like that happen, right? Where it's just like, man, we expect you to come out and upset somebody, but you did. And for me, Howard's kind of in the same situation that North Carolina Central was in last season, going into last season. They were second in the conference. They're not really coming out of nowhere. Howard hasn't been this good in a while, but they were this good last year. So them doing it they were this good last year, so them being this good this year really wouldn't be a surprise. That's one difference that they have with North Carolina Central. But you look at Central in 2021, they were the second place team. Only team that they lost to was South Carolina State, who went on to win the conference and then win the Celebration Bowl. North Carolina Central had the second team all-conference quarterback. All of those things are direct parallels to Howard. Howard only lost to North Carolina Central, who is the eventual Celebration Bowl champions and MEAC conference champions. They had the second team all-conference quarterback. The similarities are right there. It's almost a direct parallel. The only thing that's keeping it from being a direct parallel is we know what happened with North Carolina Central the year after. What's going to happen with Howard the year after their year where they set themselves up? That's the question. South Carolina State fell off in a way that I don't think many of us expected them to. We really did not expect them to do that. That could happen to Central. Or Central could lose one game, and that one game is to Howard, and Howard wins it out. But are they ready to be champions? Are they ready to have a winning record? Are they ready to capitalize off of what they did last year? But you hear the way that I'm speaking. And this sets up question number 3. You hear the way that I'm speaking. What's North Carolina Central's Achilles heel? It was something that you can take advantage of on a team that's bringing back so much success. Speaking as if they just go ahead and guarantee the championship, unless something else just so happens to happen. Hear the way that I'm talking about Howard. Are they ready to be champions? Drawing direct parallels, saying this is their year to take the crown. I'm speaking as if it's North Carolina Central and Howard, and that's it within the MEAC, who are real championship contenders. And the reason I'm speaking that way is because that's kind of how it looks going into the season. But the next question for me is, will there be a surprise team? Any team that isn't one of those two, this feels so unfair to say, but this is how I look at it. If it's not Howard and it's not North Carolina Central and some other team wins the MEAC, it will be extremely surprising. I expect Howard and North Carolina Central to be 1-2 with everybody else fighting for 3 through 6. So if that isn't the case, I'll be surprised. If one of those teams I consider to be a 3 to 6 candidate ends up being number one, I'd be extremely shocked. But who would it be? Norfolk? I don't know. Morgan? South Carolina State? Nah, I really like that one. And then Delaware State. South Carolina State is that team that really looks the most primed to do it because they did it not that long ago. It was just 2 years ago. Only one Celebration Bowl has passed since South Carolina State won one. They have the same quarterback. They have the same coach. They have some good defensive pieces still. Could they be the surprise? I don't know. But if I had to guess on one of the four, that would be the quote unquote surprise team, because surprise is also subjective. See, to me, anybody who isn't one of those two winning the conference would be a surprise. That's to me. You might not have the same bar. You might not feel the same way. But to me, if you win the conference and you're not North Carolina Central, you're not Howard, you are a surprise team, because those two teams, especially North Carolina Central, feel so stacked. They feel so ready to win it all. And it feels like all of the conversation is about those two teams, with everybody else kind of being an afterthought. If one of those four wins, it is a surprise. Let me know what you think. Is it fair? I paint the situation of South Carolina State being not far removed from a Celebration Bowl victory. Is it fair to still call them a surprise? I don't know. But South Carolina State, along with Morgan State, are the two teams that will break down as we wrap up our MEAC conference preview. We have some major questions about not only their future, but then also their leader at quarterback as we continue with Locked On HBCU. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 2. And I thank you, segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. But you know what? I thank you 3 times for making it to segment 2. So that's a whole bunch of gratitude coming out of me on today's episode. Let's spread the love. It's game week. It is game week. We have the SWAC MEAC Challenge. We have South Carolina State versus Jackson State, but we're not getting into specifics. Not today, not tomorrow. Maybe a little bit later in the week. Definitely on Friday. But right now, we're being very broad, and we're looking into the MEAC as a whole. We've broken down who could be the surprise team. I think it's South Carolina State, if anybody. We've broken down the two teams who aren't a surprise, Howard and North Carolina Central. But now let's get into Morgan State and South Carolina State a little bit more specifically. And the question for me around Morgan State is, how will Damon Wilson fare in year 2? There's a lot of excitement around the Morgan State Bears, and I think a lot of it has to do with Damon Wilson. There's been excitement since he was hired. And you know what? I'd be willing to say, if I polled 100 people like this was Family Feud and said, who would be the surprise team in the MEAC this year? Who's a team that could win it all if it isn't Howard or North Carolina Central? I'd say that Morgan State will probably put up a strong fight to be the number one answer on the board. Like when you say Morgan State, people really are going to say good answer, and they're going to mean it. They're going to really mean that. Because I think the excitement around Morgan State, it didn't go down despite them having a losing record within the conference. Nobody expected them to be one of the top 2 teams. They were in a log jam for 3. And I think if you get out of that log jam, I think that's a successful season. Last year, you were 2-3. 1 game below 500. Ended up being tied for 3rd. You're probably not happy about being 1 game below 500. However, you are happy about being right there for 3rd. Here's the thing is you had Delaware State, Norfolk State, and Morgan State all right there tied at 2 and 3. Those three teams all faced each other. Excuse me. Those teams all faced each other. So one team faced the other two, lost to one, beat the other. And it was just a cycle. And that's how they all were tied at 3. And then each and every one of them beat South Carolina State. So it's a situation where that's not really how I want to be jammed up at 3. That's kind of like a battle of the mid. So if you can elevate yourself out of this battle, out of this mud, outside of the mid mud, the mud of mid mud, battle of the mid, get out of the mud. Anyway, if you can get yourself out of that situation, then I think that's a successful year. I still think that it's North Carolina Central and Howard's to lose. But if you're looking at Morgan State and they can clearly establish themselves as the number 3 team, that's good. I think there's so much hype, so much belief that Morgan State is going to, they're going to be a fighter. They're going to be this team that's always competitive, but they're going to get over the hump. You know, I know this isn't SWAC day, but it'll be very interesting because the way people speak about them is as if they're just going to be fighters in this scrappy team. It'll be very interesting to see if they go the way of Mississippi Valley State, because I hear the way everybody else in the SWAC talks about Mississippi Valley State, and I'll keep it brief because by this time, most SWAC people have checked out. Everybody talks about Mississippi Valley State with a lot of reverence and respect, despite them not winning. And as somebody who went to Texas Southern, whose school did not win, but I felt like the 4 years I was in college, I feel like we beat Valley 3 times. I wasn't thinking about them being scrappy. I was thinking about, oh, yeah, finally a team we could beat. You don't want to be that as Morgan State. Bringing it all the way back home. You don't want to be that as Morgan State. You don't want to be this scrappy team that just doesn't win. While people respect you because you're scrappy, forget that. That is not what Damon Wilson should be shooting for, not even in year 2. I feel like he set up a strong foundation, and they're a team that they would be very close to South Carolina State when we're speaking about teams who could really surprise and make some noise for maybe even number 2. I still feel like it's going to be the Central or Howard at 1, but maybe one of these surprise teams can fight for number 2. When I say one of the surprise teams, you have you have Morgan State, you have South Carolina State. So I guess we started it off with our head teams, and now you have it with our potential surprise teams as we wrap up. And the question for South Carolina State is, can Corey Fields bring them back? I know this is unfair. I know that this isn't fair to Fields because it's extremely unjust to put everything on him. It's very unfair for me to say, can he bring him back, as if that's the one thing that's going to do it. And it's not so much that that's the one thing that's going to do it, but that could be the one thing that undoes it. That could be the one thing that just topples the whole operation. And it says, all right, I know you got a strong defense. I understand you got a good running game, but you don't have the quarterback. And don't get me wrong, you can cover up bad quarterback play. I just don't know if you can do it to a championship level. I don't know if I'd put my faith in that. I know teams have done it. I know that it has happened. It's probably even happened recently. But I'm never banking on it. So, North Carolina Central lost to South Carolina State last year. That was the Bulldogs' only victory on the season. Because it was their only victory, you can't really take solace in it because you couldn't beat anybody else. But I do believe that you can look at that and say, that's what we could be. That's what we should be. We should be competing with the top dogs. We should. If they're going to be the top dogs, we should be Dreamville. You ask me, Dreamville doesn't have a better roster. But they're right there. They're neck and neck. You know, at any given time, Dreamville can be better than Top Dog. Even if we feel like Top Dog is Top Dog. Now, this is musical references that I'll stop because everybody not paying attention to labels and whatnot. But in a funny spin on words, if I am viewing Norfolk, I don't know why I want to crown Norfolk State so much. Like, they're not even a team that I'm focusing on with a specific question. I don't know why I keep wanting to say Norfolk when it gets to North Carolina Central. You know what? Maybe Norfolk State's going to be something. Maybe because the mouth of the South can't keep their name out of his mouth when it comes to discussing the top teams in the conference. Maybe this is something deep in my subconscious saying, them Spartans, them Spartans. But in all seriousness, and we'll see if that's true, North Carolina Central and Howard are the top dogs. If South Carolina State wants to be Dreamville, if they want to be the team that's right there and can compete with them at any given moment, it's going to be important that you have Corey Fields. Yes, you have Godbolt. Yes, you have Green on that defensive line as a tandem that could really make some noise. But I don't care how much noise they make. If your quarterback isn't good this year, I do not believe you are a serious championship contender. And that's why I place so much responsibility on Corey Fields, even if it is unfair. But can he bring back South Carolina State to how successful they were only a year ago in 2021? But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day you've been doing that since 2020. Wow, you've been doing that since 2021. Thank you guys. Sincerely, I appreciate that. Wow. No kidding. Like I was thinking, I was like, dang, it's been 2022. And I was like, no, I was here for the South Carolina State Celebration Bowl victory. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, every dayers since 2021. I appreciate that. Now, on tomorrow's episode, we'll be discussing the SWAC preview. I won't have a realization like this at the end of the episode, but we'll still have a pretty fun one nevertheless. So make sure you're making us your first listen of the day yet again, like you do every single day. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.